The Nevres have Scythian customs. A generation before Darius marched, they had to leave their country because of snakes. It was not only their land that bore many serpents, but even more attacked them from the wilderness inland. Because of this, the Nevres were forced to resettle among the Buddhists. These people are apparently sorcerers. The Scythians, and the Hellenes who lived among them, said that every year every nerve was transformed into a wolf for a few days, and then regained its human form. I personally do not believe these stories, yet they so claim and even swear among all the tribes the Androphagi have the wildest manners. They know neither what is a court nor law, and are nomads. Their dress is like that of the Scythians, but their language is peculiar. This is the only tribe of cannibals in this country. All the Melanchlen wear black clothes, whence their name. Their customs are Scythian. The Budin are a large and formidable people, blue-eyed and fire-haired. Their capital is built of timber and is called Gelonos. Each side of the city walls is 30 stadia long. The city wall is high and wooden. Their dwellings and sanctuaries are also built of wood. Even there they have sanctuaries of Hellenic gods with statues, altars, and temple buildings made of wood and made after the Hellenic pattern. Every 3 years the Buddhists organize a festival in honor of Nonus and go into a Bacchic trance. In antiquity, Geloi was inhabited by the Greeks, but after they were expelled from the marketplaces, they settled among the Buddhists. They speak mostly Scythian and partly Greek. The peculiar thing is that the Budins have a different language from that of the Gelonians, and their way of life is also different. The Budins are indigenous nomads in this country. It is the only nationality in this country that eats cones. But the Geloni are farmers, gardeners, and bread eaters. In appearance and color they are nothing like the Buddhists. In any case, the Hellenes call the Geloni and the Budini, which is incorrect. Their whole land is covered with dense forests of various kinds. In the forests there is a large lake, the banks of which are marshy, and there grow reeds. In this lake they hunt otters, beavers, and other wild animals. With the bladders of these animals they line their skins, and they use the eggs of the beavers as a remedy against uterine disease. The following is said about the Saurometer: the Hellenes waged war with the Amazons. The Scythians called the Amazons Oiopata, translated into Greek as mankillers. Oios means man and pater means to kill. After the victorious battle of Thermodontes, the Hellenes, according to legend, set sail for home in 3 ships, taking with them as many Amazons as they could capture alive. On the high seas the Amazons attacked the Hellenes and slaughtered all the men. But the Amazons had no experience in steering ships, handling rudder, sails, and oars. After slaughtering the men, they drifted on the waves, chased by the winds, and finally came to rest against the flints at Meotada. The flints inhabited the lands free of Scythians. Here the Amazons disembarked and began to roam the countryside. They encountered a herd of free horses and conquered it. Riding the horses, they began to plunder the Scythian land. The Scythians could not understand what was going on, for the language, dress, and tribe of the Amazons were unknown to them. The Scythians were perplexed as to where the Amazons had come from and, thinking them to be young men, got into a fight with them. After the fight, several bodies fell into the hands of the Scythians, and so they realized that they were women. Calling a council, the Scythians decided to kill no more women, but to send to them about as many young men as there were Amazons. They were to set up camp close to the Amazons and do whatever they did if the Amazons decided to attack them. They were obliged to flee rather than engage in combat. When the pursuit ceased, they were to approach again and make camp. The Scythians decided on this because they wished to have children by the Amazons. The young Scythians who had been sent began to carry out the order. Once the women noticed that these young men had come without hostile intentions, they left them alone. From day to day the 2 camps drew nearer to each other. The young men, like the Amazons, had nothing but arms and horses, and they lived alike, engaged in hunting and robbery. At noon the Amazons, singly, and carrot in pairs, walked in the neighborhood of natural necessity. The Scythians, noticing this, began to do the same, and when a young man met an Amazon alone, the woman did not drive him away, but allowed them to have intercourse. To converse with each other, of course, they could not, since they did not understand each other's language. With her hands the Amazon indicated to the young man that he could bring a friend the next day, and she would also bring a friend. When the young man returned, he told the others about what had happened. The next day the young man appeared at the same place with a companion. They found the Amazons already waiting for them. When the youths then found out about this, they tamed the other Amazons. The two camps then united and lived together, each receiving as wife the one with whom he had first intercourse. The men, however, could not learn the language of their wives, so they learned their language. Finally, when they began to understand each other, the men told the Amazons, "We have parents, and we have property. We cannot live like this for long. We want to go back to our people and live with our people again." To this the Amazons replied, "We cannot live with your women. Our customs are not like theirs. We shoot with the bow, throw spears, ride horses, and are not accustomed to women's work. Your women do nothing of the kind. They do housework in their talagas, do not hunt, and do not go out at all. Therefore we cannot agree with them. If you want us to, the wolf is a totem for the Nevers, with whom they were considered kin. The existing cult festivals, in which the participants wore wolf skins and masks, directly correspond to the Kuka processions of the Bulgarians from antiquity to the Darius. The wolf is the totem of the Bulgarians, and in one of its meanings Bulas means wolf head myth of eagle, for the Amazons are associated with traces of matriarchy among some of the ancient Scythian peoples. Similar customs are attested in the Karyishka, Elkagishka, and Lykiishps, suggesting that they too share a common antiquity with the Scythians. You become women and show yourself honest, then go to your parents and get your inheritance. When you return here, we will begin to live as newlyweds." The young men listened to the women and did so. They went back to the Amazons after they had taken their inheritance. Then the women told them the following: "We were terrified that we would have to live in this country, and because of us you have deprived your parents and we have caused great harm to your country. But since you were willing to take us as wives, let us do this together, and move out of this country and go to live beyond the Tanais River." The young men agreed to this. They forded Tanais, and then walked 3 days east of Tanais and 3 days north of Lake Meotada. When they reached that area, which they inhabit to this day, they settled there. From that time the Saromat women preserved their ancient customs, together, and even without their men they went out with horses to hunt, went to war, and wore the same clothes as the men. The Saromati speak Scythian, but long since incorrectly, since the Amazons also mastered that language badly. As for marriage customs, they are as follows: a maiden cannot marry unless she has killed an enemy. Some die as old women, never having married, because they could not observe the custom. So the Scythian envoys arrived at the assembly of the kings of the tribes mentioned. They reported that the king of Persia, having subdued all the tribes in other parts of the world, had built a bridge of the narrows of the Bosporus, and crossed over to this continent. Then the king subdued the Thracians and made a bridge across the river Ista. Now he wished to conquer all their lands. The envoys said, "We by no means must not look aside and allow our doom. Let us come out united against the enemy. If you do not do so, we shall be forced to leave our country, or, if we remain here, to submit voluntarily to the invader. What will we do if you are unwilling to help us? And you will be no better more easily than that. So the king of Persia went against us as well as against you. Once he has conquered us, you will not and spare you. We will give you an important proof of our words. If the king of Persia is marched only against us and to avenge us for the defeat he once inflicted, he would have left in peace all nations and come straight against us. Then it would have been clear to all that he was coming against Scythians and not against the other nations. But behold, as soon as the king was transferred to our continent, he subdued all nations in his path. All the rest of the Thracian tribes were now in his hands, also our neighbors Gatai. After this message to the Scythians, the tribal kings who had come here began to confer. The opinions of the participants were divided. The kings of the Gelonians, the Budinians, and the Sarmatians agreed to help the Scythians. The kings of the Agathyrsi, the Nebri, the Androphagi, also the Melancleni, and the Thebri replied to the Scythians thus: "If you had not previously offended the Persians and made war on them, then we would have considered your request to be correct, and we would willingly have helped you. But you, without our help, attacked the land of the Persians and ruled it until a god decided. Now this god is on their side and the Persians want to repay you with the same. We did not offend these people then, and we will not be the first to stand up to them now. If the Persians attack our country too, we will not allow it. It seems to us that the Persians have not gone against us, but against those who have wronged them." Having received the answer that their neighbors would not come to their aid, the Scythians decided not to enter into open warfare with the Persians. The Scythians gradually began to retreat, taking away the cattle, filling in the wells and springs, and destroying the grass on the ground. They divided their army in two. To the first detachment, under the leadership of King Scopaces, flocked the Saromati. In case of attack by the Persians, the detachment was obliged to retreat straight to the river Tanais at the mouth of Lake Meotida. And if the Persians came back from behind, they were to pursue them. To this army belonged the first of the three parts of the Scythian kingdom, and it was ordered to march on the appointed road. The two other kingdoms, the Great Kingdom under Idan Thyrsos and the third, headed by King Thaxakis, allied with the Gelonians and the Budinians, were to retreat a measured day's march before the Persians, thus carrying out the military plan. Above all, they were to deceive the Persians in the lands of those tribes who had renounced the alliance with the Scythians, in order to involve them also in the war with the Persians. Since they were unwilling to volunteer against the Persians, they had to force them to fight against their will. Then they were to return to their own lands and attack the Persians if the opportunity presented itself. Having made such a decision, the Scythians went out against Darius' army, sending in a vanguard of their best cavalry. The talagi with the women and children and all the rest of the cattle, except the necessary amount for subsistence, they sent forward with instructions to go north only. When the caravan departed, the main body of the Scythians met the Persians about 3 days' journey from Ypres. The Scythians encamped ahead of them on a day's march and destroyed all vegetation. As soon as the Persians noticed the appearance of the Scythian cavalry, they began to move on the trail of the enemies, who kept retreating. The Persians then attacked a Scythian detachment and pursued it eastward to the Tanais River, in this case the Donets River, note. The Scythians crossed the Tanais, and immediately after them the Persians crossed and began a long pursuit until they passed from the land of the Sarmatians into the land of the Buddhists. As long as the path of the Persians went through Scythia and Sarmatia, they could not ravage the area, for it was barren. Penetrating into the land of the Budins, there the Persians came upon a city surrounded by a wooden fortress. The Buddhists fled, the city became desolate, and the Persians burned it. The Persians then continued to follow the cooling enemy farther and farther until they crossed that country and reached a desert. The wilderness was utterly uninhabited, lying north of the Budines and extending 7 days' journey. To the north of this desert dwell the Tisagit. Through their lands flow for great rivers, which in the district of the Meotians flow into the famous Lake Meotida. These rivers are the Lycos, the Oros, the Tanais, and the Siris. When Darius reached the desert, he halted the army and encamped on the Or River. The king then ordered 8 large fortifications to be built on the Ravio about 60 stadia apart. The remains of these fortifications have survived to the present day. While the king was engaged in these constructions, the Scythians whom he was pursuing surrounded him from the north and returned to Scythia. On the disappearance of the Scythians, Darius ordered the half-raised structures to be abandoned, and when the Scythians no longer appeared, he marched back west. The king assumed that the entire Scythian army was before him and that the Scythians were fleeing westward. Darius moved quite quickly and met 2 detachments of Scythian troops in Scythia. When they encountered the enemy, the king began a pursuit in which the Scythians overtook him a day's march away. And as Darius did not cease to pursue them, the Scythians, according to their military tactics, took to retreating into the dominions of those tribes who refused them aid, and above all into the country of the Melanchlenes. The invasion of the Persians and Scythians threatened the Melanchlenes. The Scythians then dragged the enemy into the country of the Androphagi. Threatening them also, they began to retreat into the lands of the Nevus. Having brought fear to the Nevus also, the Scythians retreated into the lands of the Agathi. The Agathi saw their neighbors fleeing in fear from the Scythians and sent a herald even before they had entered their land to forbid them to enter their borders. The Agathi declared to the Scythians that if they did dare to invade their country, they would first have to engage in mortal combat with the Agathi. The Agathi then raised their army to their frontier to repel the attack the Melanchlenes, Androphagi, and Nebri dared not resist the Scythians and Persians. Forgetting their threats, they fled farther and farther north into the desert. The Scythians did not enter the country of the Agathi, since they would not let them pass, and began maneuvers from the side of the Nevis to their own land. As the war dragged on and there was no end in sight, Darius sent a horseman to the king of the Scythians, Tersos, to tell him the following: "You foolish man, why have you been fleeing from me all this time, even though you had a choice? If you are able to resist my power, then stop, cease your wandering, and fight me. If you acknowledge yourself to be too weak, then also stop running away, and when you have brought land and water to your master, take and negotiate with him." To these words the king of the Scythians, Thersos, answered thus: "Such is my situation, O king. I have not before fled in fear from anyone, and I do not now flee from you. And now I act as I usually do in peacetime. And why I have not yet entered into battle with thee, I will also explain. We have neither towns nor arable land. We are not afraid of rosiation and devastation, and therefore do not immediately enter into battle. If you are willing to fight for something with us, then here we have Bashan mounds. Find them and try to destroy them, and then you will know whether we are worth fighting for them or not. But until we deem it wise, we will not enter into battle with you. That's for fighting. For my gods I acknowledge only Zeus and Hestia, queen of the Scythians. To you, instead of gifts of land and water, I will send other gifts, such as you deserve. And for calling yourself my lord, you shall weep." Such was the response of the Scythians. With this answer the herald went to Darius. The kings of the Scythians, as soon as they heard the word slavery, jumped up in anger. They sent a part of the army, which included the Sormites under the command of Scopaces, to negotiate with the Ionians who guarded the bridge across the Ister. The rest decided not to harass the Persians any longer, but to attack them when they went out in search of food. To carry out this decision, the Scythians began to stalk Darius' soldiers when they sought food for themselves. The Scythian cavalry constantly turned enemy cavalry into flight. The fleeing Scythian horsemen would rush their infantrymen who had gone to their aid. Then the Scythians, after repelling the cavalry charge, would turn back in fear of the infantrymen. The Scythians conducted similar attacks at night. I will now relate a curious phenomenon which favored the Persians and hindered the Scythians in their attacks on the camp of Darius: the roaring of the asses and mules. As I remarked before, in all the Scythian country, on account of the cold, donkeys and mules were nowhere kept. Because of this, the donkeys' braying caused a commotion in the Scythian cavalry. Not infrequently, during an attack on the Persians, the Scythian horses, on hearing a donkey's neigh, would become frightened and turn to flight. In their astonishment they pricked up their ears, for they had never heard such sounds before, nor seen such a breed of animal. But this circumstance only helped the Persians for a short time. The Scythians, perceiving the confusion of the Persians, acted in the following manner, endeavoring to keep the Persians in their own country, and to harass them by depriving them of all necessaries. The Scythians left a part of their flocks with the shepherds, and themselves retired elsewhere. The Persians, as they came, captured the cattle, and each time felt pride in their success. This was often repeated, until, at length, Darius found himself in difficulties. The Scythian kings, foreseeing this, sent a messenger to Darius with gifts, putting a bird in his hand, a mouse, a frog, and 5 arrows. The Persians asked what these gifts meant, but he replied that he had been commanded not only to hand over the good arms, and the barrow to return. According to his Zoomers, if the Persians were clever enough, they would think for themselves what these gifts mean. Hearing of this, the Persians called a council. Darius supposed that the Scythians yielded to his authority, and offered him land and water as a token of obedience, for mice dwell in the earth, and feed like men on its fruits, the frog inhabits the water, the bird more than anything resembles the horse in swiftness, and the arrows signify that the Scythians gave up resistance. Such was the opinion expressed by Darius. Against this spoke Gobryas, one of the 7 men who drove away the priest. He explained the meaning of the gifts thus: if ye Persians do not fly up into the sky like birds, or like mice bury yourselves in the ground, or like frogs leap into the swamp, ye shall not return, smitten by these arrows. Thus the Persians struggled to unravel the gifts. At this time a detachment of Scythians, who had previously stood guard at the Maeotian lake, set out for Ister to negotiate with the Ionians. When the Scythians came to the bridge of the Ister, they addressed the Ionians, saying, "Ionians, we will give you liberty if you will only listen to us. We have learned that Darius has commanded you to guard the bridge for 60 days only, and if he does not appear in those days, you are obliged to return to your homeland. And so if you do so now, you will neither apologize to the king nor to us. Wait the number of days specified for you, and then set sail for your country." The Ionians promised to comply with the request of the Scythians, who in turn hastened back at once. After the king's gifts were sent, the Scythian troops of infantry and cavalry who had remained in their own land fell into line of battle with the Persians. As the Scythians stood in battle formation, a rabbit popped out from among their ranks. Seeing him, the Scythians instantly leaped after him. When the ranks of the Scythians were stirred, and a cry went up in their camp, Darius asked what this noise meant to the enemies. On learning that the Scythians were chasing the hare, Darius said to his cronies, with whom he usually shared, "These people deeply despise us, and it is now clear to me that Darius has correctly assessed the Scythian gifts. I see for myself the state of our affairs. I need good advice on how to get home safely." To this Darius replied, "O king, I have long known by hearsay of the inaccessibility of this tribe. And here I have become even more convinced of it, having seen how they bully us. Therefore, here is my advice to you: as night falls, it is necessary, as it usually does, to light fires, abandon the sickly soldiers and all the asses to their fate, and retreat while the Scythians have not yet overtaken us at the Ister to destroy the bridge, or the Ionians have not made some disastrous decision for us." Such advice was given by Darius. When night came on, Darius proceeded to execute it. The weak soldiers of these men, whose loss to him would have been most insignificant, and also the asses, the king left in place in the camp. The asses he left because they roared, and the men because of their infirmity, on the pretext that he intended by a defensive part of the army to attack the Scythians. The abandoned soldiers were obliged at this time to guard the camp. Giving these orders to the rest of the camp, and ordering fires to be lighted, Darius departed hastily for Ister. The abandoned donkeys, after the retreat of the army, began to bray even louder than before. The Scythians, listening to the donkeys braying, were quite confident that the Persians were still in camp. The next day the Persians left in the camp realized that Darius had betrayed them. Extending their hands to the Scythians, they pleaded for mercy and told them all that had happened. When the Scythians heard this, they urgently joined forces, namely the two detachments of Scythians, one detachment with the Sormaraths and the other with the Buddhists and Gelonians, and began to chase the Persians straight to the Ister. The Persian army was largely made up of infantry and did not know the roads, and there were not even beaten paths, while the Scythians were on horseback and knew the shortest way to the Ister. Because of this, the two armies diverged and the Scythians arrived at the bridge long before the Persians. When the Scythians saw that the Persians were not yet with them, they addressed the Ionians who were on their ships with these words: "Ionians, the number of days you were told to wait has expired, and you are doing wrong by staying here. Now, destroy the bridge as quickly as you can, and go free in health, thanks be to the gods and the Scythians. And we have brought your former ruler to the point where he will no longer attack any nation." The Ionians resolved to destroy the bridge on the Scythian side, and that only at a distance as far as an arrow's flight, lest the Scythians, looking at the inaction of the Ionians, should think that they were doing something after all, and so much so that the Scythians might pass by force over the bridge over the Ister. By destroying the bridge on the Scythian side, the Ionians wished to show the Scythians that they were fulfilling their wishes. Then Histiaeus said to the Scythians in the name of all, "You Scythians have come with good counsel and in due time. You have shown us the right way, and because of this we are ready to serve you zealously. Behold, ye eyebrows, that we are destroying the bridge, and will by all means strive to free ourselves. In the meantime, while we are breaking the bridge, it is time for you to seek out the Persians, and when you find them, take the revenge for us and you that they deserve." The Scythians believed for the second time that the Ionians were telling the truth and turned back to seek out the Persians. But they were not at all fortunate enough to come upon their route. The Scythians themselves were to blame for this, for it was they who destroyed the horse pastures in that area and filled up the springs. In their search for the enemy, the Scythians walked in that part of the country where there was pasture for horses and water, thinking that the enemies would also retreat to those places. But the Persians walked along the paths they had laid before, and it was only by this means that they found the passage with great difficulty. They arrived at the place at night and found the bridge destroyed. Then the Persians were seized with fear that they had been abandoned by the Ionians. In the retinue of Darius there was an Egyptian with a very powerful voice. Darius commanded him to stand on the banks of the Ister and call Histius the Miletus. The Egyptian did so. Histius, at the very first call, brought all the ships for the transfer of the troops, and again they rigged the bridge. Thus the Persians were saved. In the search for the Persians, the Scythians suffered a setback. From that moment the Scythians considered the Ionians the most pitiful cowards of all men. Though free men, they were the most devoted slaves to their master, and no less prone to flight. Thus the Scythians mocked the Ionians. After crossing Thrace, Darius arrived at Sestos on the Chersonese. From here the king crossed to Asia in ships, and left the Persian commander Megabazus in Europe, at the head of an army of 80,000. Megabazus forever remained in the memory of the Hellespontians with the following remark. In Byzantium, Megabazus learned that the Chaldeans had settled in that country 17 years earlier than the Byzantines. On hearing of this, he said that the Chaldeans were then blind. If they were not blind, they would not have found the worst place for their city when they had the best place before their eyes. Darius left to the Hellespont this Megabazus as commander-in-chief, and he subdued all the cities which were not yet subject to the Persians. Having conquered Perin thus, Megabazus led the army through Thrace and subdued for his king all the cities and peoples on the coast. Such was the order of Darius for the conquest of Thrace. The people of the Thracians, after the Indians, were the most populous on earth. If the Thracians had been so unanimous under one master, I think they would have been invincible, and far mightier than all the nations, but as they could never be unanimous, therein lay their weakness. Their tribes in each locality bore different names. The manners and customs of all were the same, with the exception of the Gatai, the Thracians, and the Crest ones, who dwelt higher up. Of the life of the Gatai and their belief in immortality I have already told. The way of life of the Thracians is broadly similar to that of the other Thracian tribes. Only the customs at birth and death are different. They are these: at birth the relatives sit around the newborn and talk about how many disasters are yet to come to its life. At this they enumerate all human sorrows and duties. Conversely, funerals with them happen with jokes and laughter. In the opinion of the Gatai, the dead have already rid themselves of all life's ills and sorrows and lead a blissful life. The following custom exists among the tribes living north of the Crest ones: when one of the tribe dies, his wives, and with them each has many wives, begin to argue which of them the dead man loved best of all. When the dispute is settled, the men and women shower the chosen wife with praise, and the nearest relatives slaughter her at the grave and then bury her with her husband. The other women are overwhelmed with shame that they were not chosen, and this is considered a great disgrace with them. Among the other Thracians the custom is as follows: they sell their children abroad. They do not keep the virginity of the girls and allow them to have intercourse with any man. Conversely, with married women they strictly observe it and purchase them from their parents for myogo money. A tattoo with them is taken for nobility, and one who does not have one is not noble. If a man does nothing he is honored, but if he cultivates the land he is not. Seizure from war and plunder is respected. Such are their most remarkable beloved. Of the gods they honor only three: Ars, Donus, and Artemis. And unlike the rest of the citizens, their kings of all the gods worship much Hermes. In their words, they descended from this god. The burial rites of their rich men are as follows: the body of the deceased they expose for 3 days, slaughter all kinds of sacrificial animals and bless them by mentioning them, then they burn the body or bury it in the ground, piling up a mound for them, and finally they hold some kind of contest. The highest prizes with them are awarded for the martial arts. Such are the funerals among the Thracians. Of which tribes dwell further north in the country no one can say with certainty. The districts beyond the Ister seem to be uninhabited and unbounded. Of only one people beyond the Ister have I any record: the Scythians. They dress in Midianite clothes. Their horses, as they say, covered all over the body with hair 5 fingers long, were small, short, and rather weak to ride a man. But harnessed to a chariot they run quite fast, and therefore the people of this country ride in chariots. The edge of the sighing lands extends almost to the Adriatic Arenets. They are said to be Median settlers. And how they got there from Media I cannot say. But anything can happen in a great interval of time. So the Scythians, also called Digi, living north of Massalia call them Bacali, and the inhabitants of Cyprus call them Spears. According to the stories of the Thracians, many bees bred in the fields beyond the Ister, and because of them it was not possible to pass by there at all. To me, at any rate, such stories seem incredible, because these insects do not withstand the cold. Rather, these northern countries are uninhabitable because of the cold. So such tales are handed down of this country, whose coast Megabazus has subjected to the Persians. As soon as he had crossed the Hellespont, Darius remembered the great favor done him by Histiaeus of Miletus, and the advice of Caius of Mytilene. He commanded them to be brought to Sardis, and suggested that they should ask him whatever they wished. Histiaeus, who was already tyrant of Miletus, did not wish to rule any longer, but asked to be given possession of the native spear of Merkin in the land of the Edonians, where he thought of founding a city. So Histiaeus chose that land, and Caius, who was not a tyrant but a citizen, asked the king to make him tyrant of Mytilene. The king granted the wishes of both, and they set out for the places of their choice. It so happened that Darius, having become the Cid of an occasion, commanded Megabazus to subdue the Paeonians and resettle them from Europe to Asia. There were two Paeans, Pygretes and Manthias, who had the ambition to rule the Paeans, at the time when Darius was returning to Asia, residing in Sardis with his sister, Great and Beautiful. When Darius once sat before the city walls to judge the sorrows of the Lydians, they, seizing the opportunity, did this. The brothers made their sister as beautiful as possible and sent her away with a pitcher on her head for water. The girl led her horse with a tethered lead on her arm and at the same time spun flax. As she passed by, she attracted the attention of Darius, for her appearance was unusual among the Persians, the Lydians, and any other peoples of Asia. Astonished, the king sent several of his bodyguards after her with orders to follow what the maiden would do with the horse. The guards followed her from behind. And when she reached the river, she watered the horse, then filled the pitcher with water and started back again along the same road past the king, with the pitcher on her head, leading the horse with the lead tied to her hand and at the same time turning the spindle. And Darius, astonished at the account of his spies, and at what he himself saw, commanded the woman to be brought before his eyes. When she was brought, her brothers came too, stopping nearby to watch. To Darius's question as to where she came from, the youths replied that they were Paeonians, and this was their sister. The king asked what kind of people the Paeonians were, where they lived, and why they had come to Sardis. And they replied that they had come to place themselves under his protection. Paeonia is situated on the river Strunman, and the Strunman flows near the Hellespont, and they are the descendants of the Thebrians of Troy. The youth told all this when the king asked if all the women there were as industrious as she. The youths readily affirmed this, and for this reason they brought their sister before him. Then Darius wrote a letter to Megabazus to be delivered to the military commander in Thrace with orders to expel the Paeonians from their homeland and bring them to him with their wives and children. At the same hour the horseman rode with this message to the Hellespont, and crossing the strait, delivered the message to Megabazus. And Megabazus, having read the letter, took Thracian leaders and set out on a campaign against the Paeonians. When the Paeonians learned that the Persians were advancing against them, they gathered an army and headed for the sea coast, assuming that they would pass by there. So the Paeonians stood by the sea in readiness to repel the attack of Megabazus. The Persians, however, on learning that the Paeonians had assembled and occupied the pass by the sea, chose a higher route through the mountains, using guides. Then, secretly from the Paeonians, the Persians attacked their cities, left without defense. Having attacked in this way, the Persians of Lycio conquered them. At the announcement that their cities were in the hands of the Persians, the army of the Paeonians disbanded, and each warrior, returning to his city, surrendered to the Persians. Thus all the tribes of the Paeonians, the Syriapeans, the Peoples, and all the Paeonians living in the region of the Lake Prasnala, were expelled from their native lands and resettled in Asia. The tribes around Mount Pangaea, the Doberis, the Agrians, the Odomantes, and the tribes at Lake Prasnada itself were not conquered by Megbaz at all. Indeed, he tried to drive away the tribes living on the lake itself. And these tribes live there like this, in the middle of the lake, on high supporting pillars, joined crosswise. They build a planked platform, to which a tessio bridge leads from the land. And the pilings supporting the catwalk were driven in olden times by the whole tribe. Subsequently the following custom was introduced: everyone who intended to marry was to bring from the mountain called Orbal and drive 3 crosspiles for a woman. And each peon had a myogo of wives. The peons live there like this: each peon owns on this podium a hut where he lives, and has a cut hatch in the podium leading to the lake. They tie small children by a rope to their feet so they don't fall into the water. They feed fish to their horses and pack animals. There are so many fish that they only have to open the hatch and drop in an empty basket. When they take it out after a while it is full of RNBA. There are 2 kinds of fish in the lake, which are called fern and tylan. And so the conquered Paeonian tribes the Persians took to Asia. And Megabazus, after the subjugation of the Paeonians, sent envoys to Macedonia, 7 Persians, the most important men after him in the army. These men were sent as envoys to Amnant, asking for land and water for Darius. The shortest road to Macedonia passes by the Lake of Prasiades. Near the lake there was a mine which subsequently brought Alexander an annual income of a talent of silver. Behind this mine rises the mountain named Disaron, and behind it is now Macedonia. So these messengers of correspondence arrived in Macedonia, introduced themselves to Amyntas, and demanded land and water for King Darius. Amyntas promised to give both, and invited the envoys to a feast. The king arranged a sumptuous feast and graciously entertained the Persians. After the feast the Persians, now drunk, said, "Friend Macedonian, with us Persians, when we give a feast, we have a custom of inviting our concubines and wives to the table." Amyntas replied, "We have no such custom. Men and women feast separately with us, but as far as it is your wish, and you are masters, let it be yours." After these words Amyntas ordered the women to be brought. The women arrived and lined up against the Persians. At the sight of the beautiful women the Persians began to speak to Amyntas that he had not acted wisely enough, that he had not pleased them. It would have been better not to come at all than to come and sit across from them with darkened looks. Amyntas was then forced to order the women to sit down beside the Persians. But no sooner were the women seated than the Persians reached out to grope them on the breasts, for they were super drunk, and some even tried to kiss the women. At the sight of this, Amyntas, though indignant, tried to keep calm as he was very afraid of the Persians. But Alexander, the son of Amyntas, who was also a partaker of the feast, and saw all this, being a young man, and not yet having tasted the adversities of life, could not keep silent, and said to Amyntas with indignation, "Father, at your age it is better for you to go and rest, and drink no more. I will stay with the guests and prepare everything they need." Amyntas guessed that Alexander had not meant well and said, "Son, by your angry words I understand that you are sending me away, having meant something bad. Therefore I beg you to leave these people in peace, lest you destroy us. Restrain yourself and pay no attention to what is happening. As for your advice to withdraw, I agree." When Amyntas then departed, Alexander said to the Persians, "These women, your honor, are entirely at your disposal. You may at will sleep with all of them, or only with some of them. Give only a sign of your desire. And now it is time to sleep, and as I see, you have drunk quite a lot. And these women I ask you to let them bathe, and then wait for them." The Persians agreed, and Alexander sent the women to the women's chambers. He himself ordered that only the bare-bearded youths should change into women's clothes, and, giving them daggers, led them into the chambers. And to the Persians Alexander said, "Persians, you have pirated gloriously. All that we have and could give you is all before you, and even that which is dearest to us we have placed at your disposal, our mothers and sisters, that you may know what honors we give you on merit. And to the king, who sent you here, tell what a cordial welcome the Lord of Macedonia, has given you, by feeding you and giving you a bed." And then Alexander ordered the Macedonian boys dressed as women to sit next to the Persians. And when the Persians attacked the boys, they slaughtered them. Such an unhappy fate befell the envoys themselves and their retinue, for they brought with them the children and the carriage with the usual Persian cargo. Thus all, together with the envoys themselves, disappeared. Soon after, the Persians began to search out these people thoroughly. But Alexander cleverly managed to suppress this massacre. He bribed the Persian Bubar, the leading Persian official sent to investigate the disappearance of the envoys, giving him a huge sum of money and his sister Gygia as well. Thus the doom of the Persians was arranged. And that the Macedonian kings, the descendants of Perdiccas, were really Hellenes, not only they themselves assert, but I am convinced of it. Also the judges of the Olympic Games have admitted this. When Alexander asked to participate in the competitions and therefore arrived at Olympia, the Greeks participating in the competitions demanded that he be excluded because these competitions, they said, were for the Hellenes, not for the barbarians. But Alexander proved that he was an Argosian, and the judges recognized his Hellenic origin. He participated in the races and finished at the same time as the winner. All in all, that was the job. Megabazus arrived at the Hellespont with the Paeans. He ordered them to be taken across the strait and brought to Sardis. And Histiaeus of Miletus had already begun to build the city on the land presented to him by Darius as a reward for preserving the bridge. This land, called Merkin, was by the river Strymon. Megabazus heard what Histiaeus was doing, and as soon as he arrived with the Paeans at Sardis, he said to Darius, "O king, why did you do this, that you allowed this base and cunning Greek to build a city in Thrace? There are great forests there for ship timber and ores, also silver mines. Many Hellenes and barbarians dwell in the neighborhood, who, seeing the chief in him, will do day and night all his bidding. Do not let him do this, or else you are threatened with war in your own kingdom. Command him to appear before you and make him stop this, and when you have captured him here, see to it that he returns to the Hellenes no more." These words of Megabazus easily persuaded Darius, so because the king saw clearly what the consequences of building the city might be. Darius sent a messenger to Merkin with orders to convey the following to the tyrant: Histiaeus, see what I have called you for. As I had returned from Scythia and you had disappeared from my sight, I soon felt that I most regretted your absence and that I could not converse with you. I am persuaded that the highest good on earth is a wise and faithful friend. Both these things I have found in thee, and my destiny it confirms. And it is well that thou hast come to me, therefore I offer thee this: leave Miletus and the newly founded city in Thrace, go with me to Susa, and there be my fellow guardian and counselor for all that I have. So said Darius. Then the king made his stepbrother Artapherne satrap of Sardis, and together with Histiaeus he went to Susa. He appointed Otan to be commander of the army in the area by the sea. The father of this Othan, Sensamen, was one of the king's judges. Because this Sisam, bribed with money, pronounced an unjust sentence, King Cambyses ordered him to be executed and skinned. The skin he ordered to be skinned and cut into thongs, and then to bind with them the judge's seat on which he sat in court. When he had bound the seat with these thongs, Cambyses appointed his son Sisam as deputy judge, and so bade him remember on what seat he sat to pronounce sentence. So this Othan, who was to be the judge of that seat, then became the successor of Megabazus, as chief military commander. He conquered Byzantium and Chalcedonia, and Tandron in Troas and Lampunion. Then with Lesbos ships he conquered Lemnos and Imbros, and both islands were then inhabited by Pelasgians. And these Phoenicians, who came to Hellas with Cadmus, among whom were the Gephri mentioned, settled in that land, and brought to the Hellenes many sciences and a writing which, as it seems to me, was unknown to the Hellenes. The writing of the Cadmeans was originally the same as that of the other Phoenicians. Subsequently, as the language changed, so did the form of the letters. In these times of the Hellenic tribes, their neighbors were in most cases the Ionians. They adopted from the Phoenicians the writing, modified in their own way the form of the letters, and called it Phoenician, which was quite just, because the Phoenicians carried it over to Hellas. The Ionians also from antiquity called books skins, because, in the absence of papyrus, they wrote on the skins of goats and sheep. Even now many barbarous nations write on such skins. And Cleomenes, with the Athenians desirous of obtaining liberty, occupied the lower city, and laid siege to the tyrants, who shut themselves up in the Pelagian fortress.